Welcome ladies and gentlemen to this week's mechanical breakdown. This time, Transistor. In view of our recent changes in our review forms, I have decided not to change our mechanical breakdown form and just keep it as it was before. A rather serious series that has only views towards the mechanics of a game, and thus Transistor will be no different like the DMC review was. Now, moving on to Transistor itself, Transistor is a top-down, hack-and-slash, real-time, slash, turn-based, one would say, C or A RPG. Well, that all depends on what you want to play the game. The really interesting thing about Transistor combat is that it could be both real-time and turn-based, in a way, of course. All of your attacks can be used real-time, and they will have minimum cooldown after you use them, and the only thing that will limit you is the animation that will be needed for them to occur. However, if you want to, you can pause time in the entire game, plan out your attack sequence with a certain amount of turn points, and then watch it execute in a minimum amount of time so that enemies do not have the time to dodge or block your movement. Now you might ask, why take it as a mechanical breakdown? It's a rather simplistic game, or at least so it sounds. Well, the other thing interesting about Transistor is how your ability works. You have 3 slots in your skill bar. Those can be used as either passive slots, active slots, or support slots. All those have different effects, some more obvious than others. Now, a passive slot, as the name may present, is a slot that when you put your ability there, it does something in passive mode, which means you do not have to trigger or activate anything. Now, an active slot means those are the abilities that you can use either in real time or during turn time, and the support slots, what they do is in some way enhance the active slots to do different things or change the way that they behave. And this is what really gets interesting. Like, say, if you have Core, a really powerful attack that knocks your opponents upwards and deals an enormous amount of damage. In this, you can also add Crash, which is an attack that deals bonus damage. You can also add Mask, which is an attack that deals bonus backstab damage. Now, what that means is that when you deal Core, it will get the bonus damage from Crash, where you add it as a support slot, and also the bonus backstab damage from Mask. Now, this can be done in many things and in many ways, and it has different effects. Now, Transistor has a thing that has managed to really get into me, which was the fact that every move was in some way special, and no move was weaker than the other, which improved the way that the variety in the game appeared to me, which means that every time I got a new move, I didn't just use it for a few seconds and I just said, meh, I'll just go back to my old ones. I wanted to keep using that move, or maybe change it up to get the story, which is another mechanic that this game has, but it's more story oriented, so there's no point in me talking about it, and so on and so forth. Those are some really interesting points. Now, if we wanted to look at the mechanics themselves, we also have some rather interesting enemies in Transistor. Before I talk about the enemies though, I also have to talk about the limiter system. What the limiter system does is that you put handicaps on yourself, making the game harder to gain bonus experience. Also, I would recommend to anyone who likes a challenge to use the limiter system, as the basic difficulty is rather easy itself, and when you get into New Game Plus, the game will be far more enjoyable if you use the limiter system thoroughly. Now, what the limiter system does say, when an enemy dies, it will spawn more cells, which you have to then gather in order for them to permanently die, and if you do not do that, they will not permanently die and will respawn, probably in more numbers if you're playing on the New Game Plus, and then those bots will be shielded, those cells will be shielded. That means you have to attack them first before you're able to gather them, and so on and so forth. It's a really interesting system, and it really adds to the way you're playing, and after you use it sometimes and fully understand the way that it works, it's gonna make the game all the more enjoyable and all the more tactical. Now, the real-time mode is a disservice to the game, I'll be honest with that. While it might be enjoyable and might look cool, it's certainly not how the game was meant to be played. In a New Game Plus, you will usually not be able to win fights in the real-time mode, as you will be outnumbered, which will mean that you will not be able to deal with every single enemy like you would be during the turn time. time, and not to mention that the enemies deal a certain amount of damage, which is not really nice to get to your face, and you would like to dodge most of the time, as when you do lose health, you will start losing functions instead of just losing the game, which will mean that one by one your faction will disappear and you will have to start over again only if you lose all of your factions from the previous checkpoint. This is a certain way that will make you be able to fight even if you lose one faction, and it's a really interesting thing to do, and especially since your factions in the next checkpoint will be locked and you will not be able to use them for a certain amount of checkpoints. Now, other than that, what Transistor has to offer, as I mentioned before, is an interesting variety of enemies and tactics that they use. You see, the progress from a lore standpoint has a really close relation to the Transistor, the weapon that you're using. Thus, many times will it try to disrupt you and will it try to stop you from attacking or advancing, which will mean that you will see some things that you would otherwise not expect. Say, if you try to use your turn, they will disrupt you, or if you try to use a certain move, they will knock you back, and so on and so forth. It's a really interesting adversary to be going up against, and since the design of the enemies looks really cool, although that's not really the purpose of that video anyway, let's keep on keeping on. The design of the enemies look really cool. Each enemy has a really specific way to be beaten and an optimal way to be faced towards, and those may be different things, and when you are swarmed by other enemies, which you will most likely be during the gameplay, you will have to think fast and think a way around that by using your opponent's weapons against them, as friendly damage in Transistor is very much a thing. Also, I have to mention the boss fights, as the boss fights in the game are really great. You will have to face opponents that have the ability to use turn just like you, and then you have to really think about the way that you play the game and the way that you can dodge or reply to the attacks of the opponents towards you. Now, what you also might notice when you're playing those fights is that sometimes the AI doesn't work perfectly well, which will get you a bit out of the experience, as you would be expecting for it to be a far tougher opponent than it actually is. Now, other than that, I will not be able to really comment on the level design, as it's really just lore stuff. Nothing on the level design is really all that interesting from a mechanical standpoint. You have a few extra areas that you can visit and that you can fight some more opponents and get some more lore pieces. However, in a general consensus, nothing is really all that thoroughly interesting in the level design. It's mostly linear and the game is not all that long to begin with. However, I would strongly recommend a New Game Plus, as simply playing in the original mode is doing the game a disservice, and simply playing it in the real-time mode is also doing the game a disservice, unless you're a really lore-oriented guy. But since you're watching this video, you obviously aren't, and you want to know about like the mechanics of the game. Now, there's a few things that I will also have to mention about the mechanics, which would be some combinations I found rather interesting in Transistor. What I mean by that really is that there's some combinations that appear to be stronger than others sometimes, but then you realize that they're really not, considering what else you could be combining those moves with. Like, say, if you use Jaunt as a support skill to a really strong move, you will be able to use that particular move in real time. However, that's not really all that important, considering if you have enough memory to use Jaunt in something like Core, you will also be in a difficulty high enough for you to be facing rather strong enemies, which will also mean that Core in real time will not be all that useful, considering how difficult your enemies will be to kill, and also how much punishment you will get for being attacked by them. Now, also what I found really interesting is a certain move which is called Love, I think. I'm not really sure about the names. Anyway, what that move does is if you put it in passive slots, when you attack an enemy, it will come to your side and fight for you. What that made me do sometimes, and I do consider that a bit cheating, but hey, the game let me do that, is spam a move in real time that would get me some really strong enemies on my side and make them fight against the other people. And what that would kind of ruin the fight, because I was just standing there spamming the same attack over and over again and let the other guys fight for me as they would fight between themselves. But you cannot really do that for all that long, as you really have to time it perfectly, and you also have to get the cells and so on and so forth, which probably makes things a bit better, but hey, I don't know. It really felt a bit cheaty when I did that, and I did do that. Also, last but not least, there is the backdoor system in the game, which is a sort of hub for you to go and do extra missions, where you will test your ability to optimally use turn time, or to fight against copies of you, or to use a really limited amount of functions in the best way possible, or play music from the amazing soundtrack, and so on and so forth. It's a really interesting set of challenges that does not feel shoehorned in, and it's really fitting in there, and considering from a lore, so to speak, standpoint, it doesn't really make sense, but from a mechanical standpoint, it's really interesting, and you really will enjoy your time in the backdoor, completing the challenges that the game has to offer, as it really does some really stupid stuff that you would otherwise not be able to do during the gameplay sessions of the campaign. Now, I guess that's all I have to say about the game, and one last disclaimer, this game is about 6 to 7 hours long. The new game plus would probably take you a bit longer, around 7 to 8, if you're playing it properly with all the limiters and so on. The leveling system is rather interesting as well, as it gives you new functions, it increases your memory or the slots you have for your abilities and so on and so forth, and really that's about it. That is about it for Transistor. Thank you guys for watching the mechanical breakdown of Transistor. I do hope that you go buy this game, as it's really an amazing title and you should really support the developers behind it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next mechanical breakdown, probably a few weeks from now, and it will also probably be Mortal Kombat X, but I do not really know because I'm not really good at it. Anyway, see you guys next time. Honeypop is a 2D match-3 dating sim. The game has you meeting a magical love fairy in the beginning of the game and from there on you go around and meeting a girl. The dates you go with them are a match-3 grid which you have to fill the meter in order to succeed. There are limited turns that can be refilled with various items and connected with 3 joy tokens. Every girl has a specific token which she enjoys more than others, and the broken heart tokens are going to be